It's time for the Phil Ferguson Show, only on Secular Media Network.
Well, hello there, everybody. This is Phil Ferguson, and you are listening to The Phil Ferguson Show. This is show number 170, and I'm trying to get a show out real quick before I head off to the Reason Rally tomorrow. So hopefully you can find me there. I think what I will do so people can find me is I will wear a bright orange Illini t-shirt during the Reason Rally, so you'll know I'm from Illinois. So if you see an orange Illini t-shirt being worn by a guy with a head that's just a little too big for his body, that might be me. So come say hello. I'd be happy to talk to you. So we got a lot to cover today. We're going to talk about Edward Jones a little later on. This was sparked by communication with one of my listeners that said that they had an Edward Jones advisor that said they are a fiduciary. I don't know why that's so hard. Fiduciary. So, did a little research on Edward Jones and found some interesting stuff, and I'm going to share an article with you, or discuss an article from the International Business Times, which talks about Edward Jones. And I also got some emails, so I'm going to cover a couple of those things. The first thing I did recently is I went and looked at my show on iTunes, and I knew I had a couple reviews there, and I hadn't looked for a while. And now I have 29 reviews. So for all of you who are going and making reviews, thank you so much for the effort. It is greatly appreciated. 28 out of the 29 are 5 stars. Yay. One is a 3-star, and they were apparently upset that my show has swearing in it. Well, I'm pretty sure that's what the adult content indicator is supposed to tell you. So I'm sorry that you were surprised, I guess. Their concern was that they couldn't share it with their children, and I guess I'm sensitive to that, but they're probably hearing it in school anyway, so not really a big surprise to me. But anywho, so that came up, and I'm terribly sorry that person is not completely satisfied. But if you have not yet, I welcome you, I encourage you, I implore you, please go to iTunes and give me a 5-star review. Anyway, we'll move on from that. I've got some emails in here, and the first one is, hello, my name is Robert. I'm a listener to your wonderful podcast. Of course, that will always help me read it on the air, by the way. I can honestly say that I've not learned as much about investing and using money from any other source as I have from your show. I even read The Richest Man in Babylon on your recommendation and took its advice to heart. Well, thank you, Robert. That was very, very sweet. And it's my overriding goal of having the finance segment of the show is that it provides value to somebody, that you can go use this information. And people all the time say, why do you give all this information out for free? Why don't you charge? Well, it's a free show. You can listen to it. And I know that the vast majority of people are going to take this information and make their lives better. That's what I do it for. But I also know there'll be a small fraction that will contact me, which, by the way, is phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com, and say, Phil, I love what you have to say. I just don't want to do it, or I have other things. I have other priorities. The simplified explanation I give for this is I know how to change the oil in my car, but I'm not going to do it. So everybody's different. If you just want to get this information and you find it helpful, great. Make that recommendation or that 5-star review over at iTunes. I have had a few people that have contacted me and say, why don't you have a Patreon account? I'd like to donate money to support your show. And I'm very honored by that and very flattered by that, and thank you. So what I will do instead, I don't want your couple of bucks. That's not the business model for the show. But if you want to donate money, I will ask you to go to the Secular Student Alliance website and donate money there. So I want to change the future of the world and free people from religion, and I think that's a great place where you can donate money, and your money will be very effective in the long run. So we've got that. Another email I got in said, Phil, you mentioned that a Vanguard target date fund may be good in a portfolio, but not as good as one that has different positions. I think I may have read that wrong. Sorry. This is not completely clear to me. If the target date fund is investing in the same thing, why is it different? Okay, so this is going back to the last couple episodes. Last episode I talked about target date funds, and one of the problems was that it's kind of all in one portfolio, and you can't adjust it from the outside. If you know completely nothing, maybe it's an okay way for you to go, but I think it's better to actually have a portfolio of different index funds, different bonds, different types of stocks, international real estate. And the reason is a lot of those things go up and down at different times. And I talked about that quite a bit 2 shows ago. I think that was 168 and 169. It was the shows that had the whole beating stick incident, which was great fun, by the way. And so, another listener said, well, you talked about target date funds and you mentioned that they don't perform as well in the withdrawal phase. Did you actually do numbers on this, or did you just say it? Well, they got me. I just said it. It's simply because of my understanding of how they're designed and how they work. But I thought it was a really good idea that if I'm going to say these things, especially if someone questions me on it, that I should actually check the fucking math. So what I did was I took the spreadsheet that I created for show 168, I think it was, where I talked about a person that had $1 million portfolio and took out $50,000 per year. And one of the beautiful things about the way I set things up and with the cushion is that when the stock market goes down like it did in 2008, you don't sell the stocks. You take dividends from the stocks, you take dividends from the bonds, and then if you still need more to meet your annual needs for your income flow, you sell some of the bonds because you don't want to sell low. I mean, it's real old phrase, buy low, sell high. You don't want to sell low. So in effort to avoid selling low, when the stocks go down, you want to sell the bonds. And the end result was that over 10 years, even with taking out $50,000 a year, your portfolio went from $1 million to $1.2 million. And so I took that same tool that I created and I put in the Vanguard Target Date Fund 2015. Now, this is a fund that's designed for someone that retires in 2015. I took it because it is the closest one to the situation. What I really wanted was target date 2005 because my model starts back in 2006, but I couldn't find that Vanguard has a fund back then. They actually have a 2010 fund, but it started less than 10 years ago, so even though it was 9 years, I could get a really good estimate. The 2015 actually had the full 10 years of data available for its performance, so I thought to try to be as fair as possible. And so, I'll get a few examples here. So in the first year of this 10-year process, 2006, the stock market went up 15.8, but the balanced portfolio that I created for the purposes of this demonstration went up 15.8. So that's cool. The target date fund went up 11.42. This is one of the things that had me concerned, is that it's probably too overweighted in bonds. But 11.42 is not terrible, and it's only 1 year, so you never know what's going to happen. In 2008, when the market went down, the target date fund actually did quite nicely, at least compared to the other portfolios. The total stock market went down 37%. The portfolio that I had went down 30%, and the target date fund only went down 25%. So performing 5% better than my portfolio and a good 13% better than the total stock market. That's the value of diversification. The problem that it has, and that my portfolio did not have, is that if you want to take out the $50,000, you have no options. You can only take out $50,000, period, from the one and only position, because that's the point of a fucking target date fund, is that you have all your money in there and they do all the management for you. So the problem is that with the stock market, you lose 37%, and it's painful. You have to sell something really low. With the target date fund, you only lost 25%, but you're still selling something while it's down 25%. You're selling shares of the fund. And so when you have different positions that you can manage and you can control, you may have lost more money on paper at least, but you only sold the things that had that hadn't gone down. So you sold some of the bonds. So you don't lock in those losses. And when we extrapolate that out and we look forward a few more years, and I'm jumping ahead because I don't want to completely bore you to tears with this, we have a year like 2013 where the market went up 34%. My portfolio, because it has international and real estate and bonds, did not do anywhere near as well as the U.S. market. The U.S. market was on fire that year. And so I was up about 20%, and the target date fund had a return of 13% even. And so, some years you do better in one, some years you do better in the other. But the end result is that when you have your investments in different things and you can pick and choose where you're selling from, your portfolio went from 1 million to 1.2 million, and the target date fund went from 1 million to $1,060,000. So you ended up making almost $200,000 less in the end. You have slightly less volatility, which is good, but because you cannot sell individual positions and you're forced to sell just from that fund, I am delighted it's one of those cases, and sometimes it doesn't work out this way for me, that the mathematics actually confirms what I thought. So when you are in a position of actually taking out money, you don't want a target date fund. I don't want a target date fund because I'm forced to sell when the market goes down. And one of the reasons for a target date fund is to provide you all of that diversification. So the other thing that's, of course, a problem, this fund in the long run, say you weren't in retirement and you were just investing, and this is why if you have more than 10 years to go, I like the stock market. Even though the last 10 years hasn't been great for the stock market, it returned about 7%, the target date fund returned 5.3%. So you're giving up almost 2% of return on an ongoing basis. So it's one of those things that if you understand all these things, you can build a better mousetrap, a better portfolio. If you can't, and you don't, or you don't want to learn all those things, you can hire somebody that can do that. But you do want to make sure that they are a fiduciary. I think I did it right that time. You want to make sure they are a fiduciary. And that kind of segues into my next segment. But before I want to talk about Edward Jones, just popped into my head, as things tend to do. I was just this last weekend at the American Humanist Association conference in Chicago. What an absolute delightful convention. One of my highlights was I got to receive chocolate from John DeLance. He is the gentleman who plays Q in the Star Trek show. He was there at the convention, and that was great fun. And I actually had a little moment of squee, I guess, for those of you who are familiar with the term. I generally don't get starstruck, but there was an author there named Jared Diamond. He's written many books, and my favorite is Guns, Germs, and Steel. I think I have that order of words correct, but I love that book. It's from many years ago, I guess, but really, really enjoyed it and got to talk to him for a minute and handed him a card and asked him if he'd be on my podcast. And he said, well, I don't have time today. And I said, it doesn't have to be today. And he goes, well, I'm leaving tomorrow. And I said, it doesn't have to be tomorrow. He said I could email him and talk about it. So keep your fingers crossed. I will see if I can get Jared Diamond to come on the show. So with all that out of the way, we are now going to go to our little segment on Edward Jones. All right, so we're going to talk about Edward Jones. I am going to be referring a lot to an article from the International Business Times. I will put the link in the show notes, but I'm sure if you Google International Business Times and Edward Jones, you'll come up with this article. It is dated April 5th of this year, 2016. The title that I at least see here is called Obama's Conflict of Interest Rule Could Rattle Edward Jones, an Investment Giant. Yeah, we probably knew that already. A lot of people I talk to have Edward Jones as their advisors, and I use that word loosely. And what sparked this whole thing in this little investigation